Hi, my name is Benedict. This video is kind of in an answer to a question that I was given. I've already given the answer in text, but it came up from not my last video, but the one before, where I was mixing the Midsummer variations, and I talked about the danger of mixing where you solo things, particularly drums and bass. The danger that I warn against is where you make each soloed sound so huge that when you start trying to put everything together, you've got no space left. I answered in words, but I thought this is such an interesting topic, and one that I saw and learnt back in the late 80s, you know, where I'd go over to friends' places, and we'd be, you know, playing around with each other's cassette 4 tracks and soloing the sound till it was just like, you know, ooh, yeah. And then we had problems mixing it. We thought that the problem was that cassette 4 tracks sucked. Now, I don't want you to ever think they don't suck, they do suck. But you didn't have to have a terrible mix come out of them. Yes, they lost all the treble on everything, so that's part of why we thought they were ruining our mixes. But the reality was we were separating out our sounds, making them so whoompa, 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 that when you put everything together and all the sounds were going whoompa, 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 our mixes all sounded a lot like that. So I actually want to show you, I composed a piece using that kind of mindset, which was actually a bit of a struggle for me because it was the complete opposite of everything I've trained myself to do. But I said, nope, here we're going to do this the way that so many other people do. Now, I'll know that one of the reactions to this is going to be, but that's how I do it. Okay, fine. If you're getting excellent results, great. But then you probably wouldn't be here watching this. If you're getting excellent results, you'd probably be taking those mixes, putting them straight out there and killing it. I'm assuming you're not. I'm assuming that this has become your habit, you've brought into it, and there are a couple of reasons. One is that it's become a habit just because that's what you've done. You're encouraged to do it, because when you go out and over to your mate's place, look at stuff on YouTube or whatever, this is what everyone does. So you start to think, well, this is the way to do it. The other encouragement that you're even less likely to think of is that when you do it this way, you get an adrenaline rush. It's just like Facebook. You spend an awful lot of time looking at crap on Facebook, getting little adrenaline rushes, and then you post something, oh, you suck so bad. No, you suck badder. Little adrenaline rushes. Are you a junkie? Or are you a musician? By musician, composer, as in you are creating, you know, a work of art. You know, when you hear your total piece of music, does it want to feel like the heavens have opened? I'm going with that. But if you've allowed yourself to become the adrenaline junkie from hearing soloed sounds, your focus is always going to be on that and not on creating this piece that makes angels cry. So let's walk through this piece. I'm not going to play you the whole piece, not to start with. I will later, and I'll contrast. I'll contrast between the piece as it was written by hammering itself into the limiter, as you'll see, contrasted with me taking the same piece, making minor changes, but actually mixing it using the style that you've seen in the last few videos. So let's run through. Soloed sounds. Oops, shouldn't have done that. Let's just put myself into the middle so I've got all the stuff happening. Huge. But look what's happening up here. We've got no dynamic range. We're already a couple of dB into our limiter. This is our mastering limiter. We're already a couple of dB into it. Actually, I'll turn off the mastering stuff. This is a 0. Sounds great on its own. It's pretty cool. It's pretty Great. So let's look at what we got. Kick drum. Needs so many parts, it's actually two things at once. So if we kill off the bits, analog sound, ooh, needs more. Overdrive it. Use this resonance, which I really just discovered as a technique right now as I was doing this. So I learned something, bit of drive. A strong resonance with a large size, you're actually getting that flappy resonance sound that you get in drums. So we've added some more manliness to our sound, and then up here we need to pull it through a little bit because it's so huge there's nothing to pull it through the mix, so we add some noise on top, because if it hasn't got a tip 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 on the beginning, it's never coming through the mix. Snare, just turn that off. So a simple tone. You can really hear the resonator go and do its job there. I've got to say that's kind of cool. And then we put in some more noise and put the same resonance on it. So I feel like a man already. Hi-hats, pretty simple. I will say I did have to do quite a bit of adjustment to get them to fit even just into the drum mix, because these fellas are so tubby, it was hard to find a point in which they sat. A couple of bongos or whatever the hell they are. Then show you the typical sort of over-processing that we get. For the snare, I automated this so that it moves just a little bit. Otherwise it sounds far too static. And because it's so full, so you really need to put more effort into moving things around and poking them through, because it's almost like every sound is trying to take up a whole mix at once. So a little bit of movement has really given me quite a bit of an improvement there. The snare is giving reverb. To fill it out. A little bit of panning on those guys. Kind of cool on its own, but that's not what we do. We tend to keep going. If I'd been doing this myself for my own piece, I would have stopped there probably until I'd finished my piece. But nope, we have to overdo it. So here we go. Start to crush it. Then we go off and crush it again. Hear how the tone really changes. But the problem is that it's losing its clarity. So we then need to process it again. I added some mids to start to pull it through, which meant that it then started to seem a little thin in comparison. So I have to add even more bass. And then of course we start to have level problems. So I'll limit it, which makes it sound even grander again. But the problem is, look, we're pinning our mix before we've done anything. So while the sound is super cool, you know, we've got that big adrenaline rush, I've got no more space left. And a mix is about balancing space. So let's move to the next sound. It was a bass sound, of course. Kind of cool. compress it a little bit because it really needs a bit of punch. We needed more bass because, quite honestly, with the drums being so large, it was cool, but it didn't have any heft in the mix. In other words, it just wasn't. So, double them up. Of course, it's got the obligatory bit of drive on it, so they then get summed into their own channel, where I start to insult them further. Let's just turn this off. Oops, sorry. More compression. So this is compressed and then it's compressed again. Gives it a dishwashy sound. That's of course not enough, we've got to drive it a bit. Now I'm not driving it into Splatsville, but that little bit of, we've got to add something in because we just squashed the buggery out of it. So that then brings us to having to put something back into it. All this compression has made it sound a bit dull. You might think, oh, but you don't need any treble space. But the thing with that is that because we've got so much happening in that kick drum, in the drums, that we're struggling with space. So I'm actually having to put air on my bass sounds. And you'll notice one of these bass sounds is kind of high. So our bass sounds are now operating across most of the spectrum as well. So a little bit of air to help pull that through. And then of course this thing, because the problem with it being the same all the time, is that there's so much in there that the brain just goes, that's mud. In which case, it kind of stops listening. So this sneaky freaky trick here is quite simply playing the auto wah roll. Wow, wow. So it's scanning across the frequency range there in the mids, right through the mids, to help pull that forward and keep it constantly changing. So we're fooling the brain to accept the fact that there's more and more going on. This did make it a lot louder, so I pulled it back here, and that's just driving the whole thing. So we'll turn that off, we'd finished there. Then went to start to try and add try to think of what one of the silliest things that I could add was, and of course a choir was pretty silly. Again, I didn't do a lot. I did consider doing a lot of compression, but needs just that little bit, just to give it a little bit of punch on the front, or it doesn't really come through. Choirs generally want a lot of reverb to give them that great big space, but the problem is that as you add the reverb back in, then it just starts to wash. I tried the idea of compressing the reverb in as well, but then it just sounded choppy. And you need to pull it through, because the problem is we've got so much happening across our whole range just between our drums and bass already that I've got to really push things to make them come through. Again, I'm having to go into air, and you realise we're going to have some problems down the track. A little bit of cut there, fine. But the problem with doing this to get it to pull through is it then starts to sound thin, so I have to add in the mids. So we're really jamming a lot of stuff into the middle of our mix. We're really kind of heavying it up. And at the time, it's easy to think, yeah, this is great, you know. All these sounds so meaty, so manly, you know. I feel so great. I'm so excited. So these two are essentially copying each other because the choir just doesn't end up being big enough to cut it on its own. It's a big sound. It's a great sound. I've used it on its own lots of times with effects and stuff, but you just can't put enough effects on this and fill it out enough because there's so much going on already, in which case you've got to layer in another sound. I make this behave slightly differently because it's layered in, but I sort of think, well, it's easy to just layer in. I'm going to have it do something slightly different, so it separates them out from being layers. Because this is where the composer part of me comes out. It just doing perfect layers just seems to me as lazy. Whereas if I can have them be slightly different from one another, and the difference really only is in some timings, by being slightly different from each other, then those changes get noticed by the ear, and it helps pull them through. It helps solve the very problem that I'm creating, rather than having them be exactly the same. It's got some differences. But that's kind of a pretty sound, and I know that's just super uncool. So it needs to cut through. So what better than to use some ghastly distortion process that, as you can hear, is a squeaky screen door kind of stuff. But it is kind of cool. That one, oddly enough, didn't end up having any compression go on it. Probably because I forgot. Next, we of course needed a riser. This one ends up playing a musical roll as well, so you hear the musical roll here. So a simple sound. Of course, we have to make it unison so that it's like a reverb. So that plays a musical role here. Initially, it came into the mix as a riser, which you'll hear later. But here, how we're sort of filling that out as well. So it's even more layers. Now the melody, and this is where it started to get tricky. Not the world's greatest melody. This is a test piece. It's not written to be the coolest thing ever, but when I put the whole thing together, it was like, well, this got a little bit of a Kraftwerk feel. So of course I liked it, I kept it. But the problem I found was that this sound on its own wouldn't cut the mix. Because the mix is so full already of this kind of stuff going on that there wasn't space to actually have a melody which was remotely emotive. Now remember, emotive melodies are what makes tracks work. If we took away all the melody from, say, Hotel California, what kind of song would we have? Nothing. It'd be shit. But no, we've got a wonderful song which has lasted decades and will last decades more because it's got these really emotive melodies, along with the words that not a lick of sense. But we know they make some kind of sense, and that's what counts. There's a story in there. So to make this pull through, I actually had to chop it up. And that's sort of a problem. And I know techno goes, oh, but that's how it's cool. But you're running out of choices. This is because we started so aggressively that we'd run out of choices. So if I was to take this piece now, that we've heard all the parts, look at this. We've got no headroom whatsoever. We're really pinning this, you know, it's chopping off over 4 dB off the top all the time. And it's very full. I can't hear it so much on these headphones, so I could think I've done a nice mix on these. but out on my speakers, and I haven't even taken it to the other room with a sub because I know it's going to suck badly. It's going to be too on the sub. But just on my speakers alone, yes, I can hear this really exciting with these tubby drums. But we've actually gutted all the instrumental parts. Now remember, your instrumental parts are what lead the mix. So the equivalent of taking Hotel California and muting the singers and going, isn't it a great song? No, it's pointless. So the problem is, while it sounds impressive and I'm so wedded to these sounds that I'm thinking, wow, they're all so super superb, and it's really hard to become unwedded to a sound. Something that you've had fun with, something that's given you that adrenaline rush. Just like it's hard to walk away from speed and heroin and Facebook. It's hard to walk away from when you've adrenalized yourself over these sounds. It's hard to say, you know what, I might have backed myself into a corner here. But that's why so many people end up making mixes and then they struggle with either finishing the piece musically because they've got no space left, or putting it together saying, okay, it's a wrap, putting it out there and going, why has it got no heart, no passion, no anything? Why does it sound muddy? Because when they come back, they're not quite as wedded to those sounds. So have the courage, if you've gone down this path, to actually say, yes, that's one way of doing it, but unless I'm getting stellar results from this, maybe I'll accept that that wasn't the best way of doing it and try a different way. Different way is, here we go, same track. So let's go to the same place. See how we've now got space here on top. We're only a dB or so over. I know some people say, oh, it's great, you know, you lop off 10 dB on top of everything you do. You need 12 dB of space here. I'm pushing it a little, but you need 12 dB of space here. Otherwise, your mix, while it's going to sound rushy now, it's going to be like, it's going to be really tiring later for you and anybody who listens to it. They're just going to go, like I listened to an album from somebody the other day, and everyone else is going, oh, it sounds great. Most of them haven't even listened to all of the first track. I ended up listening to the whole thing. I'd given him some negative feedback on it. I appreciate he'd put some work into it. I really do. He said he'd worked for 3 years to put this thing together. But the problem was the whole thing was too loud. It had no dynamics. And then, of course, things were auto-tuned and there wasn't space for melodies. And I know he was chasing a retro wave crowd, thinking that's all they want to hear, and he's kind of right. But the problem is, that record's done and dusted. It took him 3 years to make, 3 minutes to be forgotten. That's the complete opposite of Hotel California. Well, it took them ages to write that song, but, you know, there are songs out there that are great songs that took, you know, comparatively 3 minutes to write and have lasted 30 years. That's when you get it right. Doesn't mean that, you know, you don't take time to write things, but my point is that it needs to last. He's put a lot of time into something, and he's overcooked the things that don't matter and undercooked the things that do matter. So people will go, oh man, your mix sounds great. Oh, it's so loud, so blamming, so... But most of them have gone before they've even listened to the first track. And I know that's a little separate from your mix, but there's no reason for me to want to come back. I wanted to hear that music. I wanted to take in what he told me he was going to tell me, but when he got round to telling me, he was too interested in not telling me that and telling me something else. And the something else he was telling me was how blamming his drums were, how he'd sidechained stuff. That's what he was telling me as I was listening to his music, how he'd auto-tuned stuff, rather than telling me the stories that I wanted to hear, which was whatever his songs were about, and I have no idea. So don't make the mistake. So here, I pulled this right down. I left most of the processing the same, But the big difference is I turned off these things that gave the extra tub. They do sound great, and it's a technique I'm going to remember, but they create such tubby drums that, as you will hear, because we will go and look at this. Here are the pair of these together. So here is the one that I walked you through all the sounds. It starts like this. Let's go listen to the other one. This is different because it's got a fade in the beginning. So what I'm hoping that you're hearing there is that while this version, like the top version, does sound very oomphy. Is that really woof, 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 with the kicks and basses? There's actually a lack of clarity in the music itself. Whereas when we swap to this fella, we're very aware of those drums. Oh, to be honest, there was one other thing. I actually increased the pitch of the noise component of the kick drum. So you'll hear that it's got quite a bright tick on the top because I need to pull it through. I actually needed to back that kick in particular off to lower it in the mix. And the best way to lower it in the mix while still giving it tremendous presence is to actually give it that little tick on the front. So the noise component, that little of noise, it's kind of like a hi-hat, only shorter, on the front of that, rather than being lower, which sounds very meaty, I've lifted it high. So our bass line now has dominance down there. That's a nice big, so that's good. But listen to the difference with melodic parts. Overall, musically, this is louder. Yeah, and you go, but the other one's louder, Benedict. Note the term, musically, this one is louder. By backing off all that, it allows me to actually turn the rest of the mix up, which means the things that are unique about this track, which are not kick drums, let me tell you, kick drums are never unique. The things that are unique about this track are now louder. Here they're swallowed. Because that kick drum in particular kind of swallows them. The mix feels a bit gutted. Whereas here, so let me show you something interesting. We're going to have to shave a little bit off here. There's the original. It's louder. But where are you hearing more musical clarity? This one over here. So don't make the mistake of going, oh, but that's better because it's louder. No. The reality here is that this is musically louder. We've unwedded ourselves to the drums, because the drums aren't what make this piece happen. They could, and I've pulled them through, and it's given a little bit more space for the bongos and hi-hats to do their thing. But we've got space. So look at the difference here. If you're only listening to the kick drum, then you're going to say this is a better mix. I mean, yeah, it sounds bloody brilliant. Who would want to sample that kick drum? No, you can't. But listen to the difference here. Actually, to be fair, I think musically there's a little difference here, but nonetheless, hear how this is musically so much clearer. So while it's tempting to say, oh, but if you think about the drums, where's the melody? Those extra instruments that I've gone to the time and trouble of writing and putting in this to make it sound fuller, we now have got a fuller mix. Now, I'm not the only person that does things this way, because there are plenty of techno, house, what have you, don't care what the subgenre name is, where you listen to the drums like this. That kick drum is really hitting us up here. This version, they're hitting us down here, but the problem is they're killing the rest of the track in the process. In which case, decide what's important. Melody is important, it's unique. Now they're exactly the same piece, you see I can play them together. Yes, I did end up adding more of the melodic stuff in here, so to be fair, these are not exactly the same. But hear how it's still got the feel of the drums, they're still there. But you've got this whole more, like a thicker piece musically. And that's going to make it more interesting over time. Plus, if I put that in my lounge room now with the sub, this version that's properly mixed is going to work. If we take that out and put that in some guy's Lancer with a Kenwood sub in the back, then this is probably not going to fall to pieces. This is going to have his sub going and it's actually going to sound like crap. He's going to turn it off because he's going to go, that's just too much bass, mate. Sounds like shit, mate. And he'll go back to something that sounds like it's got more bass than this, but is in essence mixed more like this. So real change of paradigm. So the difference between these two mixes is that I composed them both exactly the same. I simply did a save as version 2. Yes, I did in the break end up bringing these bits in. I forgot that bit. So there's a slight difference there. But the difference was fairly simple. Yes, I turned off these things. I could have left them on and still mixed it that way. But I knew I wanted the drums to be just that little bit smaller. It's just like compressing them so that you've got more of the peak rather than the oof. But I could have done it. So I went through each of these sounds and made sure that we weren't pinning things as much. I actually did the classic pull them back to peaking at -12 and then put my mix back together again. I also went through and did this on each sound. Went through the actual sounds and EQ'd them. The bass. So as you see, a few layers of EQ. That had enough EQ in itself, didn't really need anything. Lots of air, pulled out some of the highs. So everything's got a lot more clarity as well. And you can't do that very well when you've got an overfull mix, an overloud mix that you're hammering into your limiter, with your limiter already going blub, 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 because it all ends up being the same level anyway. So have that limiter off. Your mix should be low enough that it's not triggering any limiters, and then you can create the tones that you want, and then you can start to push it back up. We could push this back up and master it harder, but you notice without as much coming off in the final mastering, I've got a track that's essentially louder. So that was the only difference, going back, yes, pulling those drums back a bit, making the sound a little less processed, pulling all of these sounds back so that they start at the -12. I didn't have to do that with all the sounds because a lot of them were low enough anyway, but just so I'm not starting with a pinned set of masters, creating the tone, putting it together, and then mastering it. So as you'll see that everything gets less done to it. With the first one, to number 1, I actually had to turn this down. That's not a good sign. When you get into your final limiter and you're going, this is so loud, I have to turn it down. No. Push up, just like when you tune a guitar, start low, tune up, because if you tune down, it's going to be flat. When you're mastering, if you have to turn the volume down before you go into your limiter, you've got a problem. You've really got a problem. If this is limiting before you finished your mix, you've got a problem. So the idea is that you limit low, you master low, and then you bring it up to your final stage. So in fact, I've had to pull this down because it just, you saw. It's still awful because it's still swallowed everything. And what if we pull this back to -6 dB? So straight away you can feel that things breathe a little better. You're not getting that, which I know you want, but that's adrenaline rush. You're going to forget about that, and the person that you hand this song to on YouTube or whatever format, wherever you put this song out, they're not coming in looking for that. They're looking for their own kind of adrenaline rush, which is hearing this piece, the heavens open, and they want to take their clothes off and run around with them flapping over their heads, whatever makes the whole piece of music work for them. That's your job, to make that. I think I've probably covered everything. If you've got questions, down below. I hope this has been useful. Make sure, I should have said this before, make sure you listen to this on proper speakers, not headphones, not laptop speakers, not your phone. You're not going to hear squat. Well, maybe you will, but please use real speakers. Questions down below. Lovely, obviously, if you subscribe to me. That way you'll get to see and hear other stuff that I'm doing. Thanks very much.